You ever seen someone run into the same problems over and over and over again? Every 3 months or so, they hit the same challenge that they had before, and they can't seem to ever break this cycle. What's going on here? And how do I keep running into the same problem? Make me wonder, how did I get here yet again? I thought I was healed. I'm not, but here we are again. What's happening here is that they are not integrating their last animal. It's not developed enough, and they are highly unaware of it, and that continues to lead us down the same path over and over. And I'm sure none of this makes sense, but in short time you might get a better feel for what I'm saying. But essentially, you have cognitive functions that are tied to your personality type. You have two introverted functions and two extroverted functions. Two introverted functions paired together equal sleep. Two extroverted functions paired together equal play. Extroverted observing with introverted deciding means that there's consume, and then extroverted deciding with introverted observing means there's blast. One way to think about this is that sleep is the same old story about myself. Play is random stories about others. Consume is random stories about myself, while blast is the same old story about others. And we have two saviors, whether it's sleep or play in the energy side of it, or we have blast or consume in the information side of it. You get any type of pairings, but you have one of each. And you can start to see that you start to become imbalanced. So for instance, if you have blast and play, that has a lot of an extroversion energy to it, meaning that you're going outward a lot, versus sleep and consume, you are really focused in on yourself. So that really comes like introversion versus extroversion. But then you start to get a blend, which bleeds into this idea of ambiverts. And that's where you see yourself going both ways, both outward and inward. And that's where I find myself most often. So for me, I have consume at the top, which means that I love learning things. I continue to bring in information. I read books, I read articles, I listen to the people around me because I don't necessarily know. I can't do it all, so I need the people around me to help. And you see it play out over and over and over again. I just can't get enough, so to speak. My next animal is play, where I like to ping off the tribe. This is me. I have an idea. I want to see if the tribe agrees. This is me going out to the tribe saying, do you agree? Yes or no? And if it's positive, great. If it's negative, also great. It gives me that feedback loop that I need to make sure that I am consuming the right information and updating the information as I go. My next animal is blast, which is essentially getting things done. It's observing myself and acting on the tribe. While I can do it because it's my third animal, I'm just still not very good at it. I don't like to tell people what to do, but I can. It's also paired with this idea of giving out information that's known. So I've done the consumption. Can I blast? Yes. And if you notice, it takes me a long time to do those videos in between. And the fact that I'm stumbling as much as I am gives you a good feedback of what that exactly entails. But here I am. And then lastly, I have sleep last, which is essentially me processing my inner world. And this is where I run into problems every 3 months, where I get myself into a relationship and then things go amok and I don't learn from it. So I repeat the pattern until the end of time. So if you have been in my world, you can see that play out the entire time. So I have to do the work to fix this. So this really brings me to what my topic is. So starting with sleep last, because it's personal to me, I see it as basically an ADHD response. It is developing coping mechanisms, addictions, distractions, anything that's going to keep me outside of my inner world. It helps me be able to just go and not think about all the negative things that have occurred to me. And it runs into problems because, like I said, I continue to do the same problems and I am burning myself out in the process. I am not taking the time to regulate myself and my emotions to make sure that I am stable long term. So to take a famous example, Robert Downey Jr. struggled with addiction for a long time. and he overcame it through doing the work to make him a better person. And if you've seen Iron Man, it kind of follows that same trajectory. It was a person that was doing his own thing, being dangerous, had to go to the tribe, fix himself, and become a better person in the process. And it's a really clear example of somebody who has done the work that can get to where he wants to be. And just to offset that, you also have the positive, like Dolly Parton, who goes out and does so many good things for the community because that's something that she values. So while you have the good, you also have the bad. So opposite of sleep last is play last, where people go out into the community and get drained. They want to go back inward. They don't want to deal with the people. There's too many variables in the environment that is becoming taxing on their internal systems, and they need to figure out how to get back to normalcy. And where I see this really play out is the people that have their life on repeat. They go about their own business over and over and over, and they are unable to move with friend groups that might be changing dynamics, or the world that's changing dynamics. How many times can I say dynamics? But they end up getting themselves into an isolated position because they don't want to move, and the easiest way to get themselves out of it is just to take themselves out of the picture entirely. A famous example of this is Jerry Seinfeld, and if you've watched his show, it is essentially talking about the wild things that happen out in the environment and his reactions to it, and they always are very comical, and he shed some really good light into it. But that is the perfect example of what a play last would be like in the environment. And then another example would be Khloe Kardashian, who typically is outside of the limelight but does great things. So just because you have play last doesn't mean you can't be somebody who does great in the world. And if you're following along, sometimes the play last gets confused with consume last, where both of these are really, they don't want to be moved. So they are stubborn, so to speak. While the play last doesn't like to move with the energy, the consume last doesn't want to move with the information. And this leads to a challenge where they aren't taking in new information and changing their worldview. These people are going to be very good at teaching a subject that they don't necessarily know all that about, but they can do it because they have that confidence. They have that value system that says, this works for me, this will work for others. And this can be both beautiful and detrimental. And where I really saw this play out was just this week. The election happened and a lot of people had a lot of opinions. Some were very appalled to the results and were vocal about it. They didn't update their worldview enough. A famous example of this is Kamala Harris herself. She didn't make the adjustments to what was actually happening in the world around her and stuck to her guns. She said that this is how it should be, this is how people should perceive it, and she ended up inevitably coming to a crash in that Trump was elected. And I want to note that Trump is actually the flip of Kamala, where Trump has sleep last, Kamala has play last, Trump has consume above blast, and Kamala has blast above consume. So you saw Trump in being adaptable, changing to his environment, changing his messaging based on what he was, all the information he was taking, while Kamala did not do any of that. She stuck to exactly where she was at, and we saw the whole dynamic play out. But to alleviate all of this potentially triggering information, we can look at Larry David and his show Curb Your Enthusiasm, which has a very comical scene where he is trying to ask Siri to give him directions to some place, and she keeps not being able to understand him, and he just freaks out, right? He hasn't updated his toolkit to make himself a little bit better and more adaptable to a situation, so he's stuck in his own ways. Blast last, on the other hand, opposite of consume last, is when people basically mumble, they don't get to the point of what they're saying, they don't want to commit to a conclusion, and so it just leaves a void. These people are never prepared enough to take action, so they just wait and wait. until they finally think that they have enough, which inevitably never comes. And where I see this play out is, let's say in a work project, you are asking somebody to solve a potential problem that you're seeing, and somebody who has blast last is going to take in all of these sensory or information, all of this data to make one of the best proposals, but they don't feel like they're allowed to do it because they don't trust themselves enough. So it gets closer to the deadline of the project, and next thing you know, it's late. What happened? Well, what they didn't realize is that they did so much work in consuming all the information that they were actually the most prepared person out of anybody to actually implement the strategy, but they just weren't allowing themselves to do it. A famous example of this is Princess Diana. And like I mentioned before, she had troubles with speaking. So she had a speech coach, and that helped her be able to speak to the public and match her tone to her message. She was one of those people that kind of mumbled or just didn't have that grace, so to speak. But the other side of it too is that she didn't voice her opinion about what was going on in her marriage for too long. And then once she finally found her voice, she was able to do it. But we all saw what happened when all of this was playing out, but she was unable to take action. And then another example is Heath Ledger. And there's just so much to say about what he does. He is essentially somebody who can embody himself into his character, and it's some of the most beautiful work that you've ever seen. But when you see him on the red carpet, for instance, you're going to see a person who is just kind of goofy a little bit, so to speak. He's out there, but more importantly, somebody asks him a question and then he just like leaves a void by being not answering and just leaving. So the people who have blast last typically are the people that are just going to do their Irish goodbye, not tell anybody, just see ya. So I know that was a lot, but thank you for listening to everything I had to say. I feel like this is a really important thing, especially with how much turbulence that we are all experiencing. We can learn a little bit more about each other and how we process and how we can support each other in these moments, whether it's your friends or family members or yourself. Recognizing that it takes time for us to finally integrate our last animal. Be graceful with yourself, and just recognize that most people don't necessarily do it until they're in their late 30s. And that usually comes with this like midlife crisis, so to speak. So you're on the right track. It'll take a little time, energy, a lot of hurt. I'm from personal experience, honestly. But we're all in it together, and we're here to support each other. So thank you for listening, and I hope that this made a lot of sense.